She fought the magnetic pull with every ounce of her iron will, but his unexpected presence, raw and entirely out of place in her gilded world, ignited a dangerous flame she couldn't extinguish. A forbidden yearning bloomed where only control should reign, threatening the empire she'd built stone by cold stone. Hello and a warm welcome to all you amazing viewers. I'm your storyteller Morgan, and I hope this message finds you well. Before we dive into this incredible journey, if you crave stories about consuming romance, transformative passion, and how a single forbidden glance can shatter worlds, you're in the perfect place. If you want a soul-stirring love story that will linger long after, stay until the very end. You won't want to miss a single heart-pounding moment. It will be worth every second. If you haven't yet, please subscribe and let's begin this unforgettable story together. Chapter 1. The air in Seraphina Bellweather's penthouse office hummed with sterile perfection. Filtered through triple-paned glass, the mid-morning light fell in precise, dustless rectangles across the bleached oak floor. Outside, New Veridia sprawled like a circuit board, a testament to her ruthless efficiency. Inside, the temperature was precisely 72 degrees Fahrenheit, the scent faintly citrus and antiseptic. Sarah sat behind her monolithic desk, a sleek obsidian monolith, reflecting the sharp angles of her cheekbones and the uncompromising line of her mouth. She wore power like her tailored ivory sheath dress, flawless, impenetrable, and utterly devoid of frivolity. A single incongruous file folder marred the desk's pristine surface. Thorne, Callum, employment record, construction division. Her father's dying wish, codified into legal obligation, sat within its flimsy cardboard confines. Marry him, ensure the Bellweather legacy flowed through a union approved by tradition, however distasteful. The man inside the file was a phantom, a competent but utterly unremarkable construction worker, perpetually employed on Bellweather sites, background check clean but sparse, penniless, rootless, safe, a cipher to fulfill a clause and then be discreetly managed. A soft chime announced his arrival. Sarah didn't look up immediately, finishing the digital signature on a multi-million-dollar acquisition. The door slid open with a near-silent whisper. He filled the doorway differently than she'd expected, not with bulk, but with a stillness that seemed to absorb the room's sterile energy. Callum Thorne stood just over 6 feet, shoulders broad beneath a faded blue workshirt rolled up to reveal forearms, corded with muscle and dusted with fine pale gold hair. His jeans were worn but clean, his heavy work boots scuffed but not muddy, a concession perhaps to her domain. He carried no hard hat today. His hair, the color of sun-bleached wheat, was slightly too long, brushing his collar, but it was his eyes that arrested her when she finally lifted her gaze. Gray. Not soft dove gray, but the color of storm-laden slate, sharp and unsettlingly direct. They swept over her office, not with awe, but with a quiet assessment that felt unnervingly intimate. "Mr. Thorne," Sarah stated, her voice cool and precise, a scalpel cutting the air. "Please sit." She gestured to the minimalist chair opposite her desk, an uncomfortable-looking sculpture in chrome and black leather. He moved with a quiet economy, his boots making a soft foreign thud on the polished wood. He didn't slouch, but sat upright, his large calloused hands resting loosely on his knees. There was no deference in his posture, only a watchful calm. The faint scent of sun-warmed cotton, sawdust, and something earthy, like fresh-turned soil, drifted across the desk, an olfactory intrusion into her controlled atmosphere. "Miss Bellweather," he acknowledged. His voice was a low baritone, rough-edged like unpolished stone, yet surprisingly clear. It resonated in the quiet room. Sarah pushed the prenuptial agreement across the obsidian surface. "The terms are non-negotiable. A civil ceremony. Separate residences maintained, though you will reside in the guest suite of the penthouse for appearances. A monthly stipend commensurate with your current salary. Discretion is paramount. This is a legal formality to satisfy my late father's stipulations regarding estate inheritance." She kept her gaze fixed on the document, not on the man whose presence seemed to generate a low-level hum against her skin. "You understand this is purely transactional, a ghost of something, amusement, challenge, flickered in those storm-gray eyes. Transactional," he repeated, the word rolling off his tongue, tasting it. His gaze lingered on her face, tracing the sharp line of her jaw, the controlled tension in her neck. "Seems a cold word for tying knots." Sarah's spine stiffened imperceptibly. "It accurately reflects the nature of this arrangement. Sentiment has no place in business, Mr. Thorne, and this is business." She tapped the document. "Sign here, initial here, and here." He didn't reach for the pen immediately. His eyes held hers. "And what about the other terms?" "Other terms?" Her brow arched, a razor-thin line of impatience. "Sharing a roof, breathing the same air. He leaned forward slightly, just enough to make the space between them feel charged. The scent of sawdust intensified. Seems that might require a bit more negotiation, or at least tolerance. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, gone before she could be certain it existed. Flustered, a sensation as alien as his presence, Sarah snapped, "Tolerance is manageable, as is maintaining appropriate boundaries. Your quarters are separate. Our paths need rarely cross outside of necessary public appearances." She pushed the pen towards him, the movement sharp. "Sign, Mr. Thorne. Time is a resource I allocate sparingly." He held her gaze for a beat longer, that unnerving assessment again. Then, with a shrug that seemed too fluid for his size, he picked up the pen. His fingers were long, the knuckles prominent, the skin roughened and ingrained with faint lines of dirt no amount of scrubbing could erase. Watching those capable hands scroll Callum Thorne with surprising clarity felt strangely violating. The scratch of the pen was loud in the silence. The single word hung there, heavy with unspoken implications. "Good." Sarah gathered the agreement, her movements brisk, reclaiming control. "My assistant Eleanor will handle the logistics. The ceremony is tomorrow, 10 a.m. at the Municipal Registry Office. Be punctual." She stood, a clear dismissal. "Eleanor will show you out." He rose, his height momentarily dominating the space before her desk. He didn't move towards the door immediately. His gaze swept over her again, from the precise knot of her chignon to the sharp points of her stiletto heels. "Transactional," he murmured again, almost to himself. Then, with a slight nod that felt more like an assessment than deference, he turned and walked out, his boots leaving faint, temporary impressions on the pristine floor. The scent of sun, dust, and earth lingered long after the doors hissed shut behind him. The Municipal Registry Office was a study in bureaucratic beige. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, bleaching the color from everything. Sarah stood rigidly beside Callum, a study in contrasts. She wore a simple, elegant cream shift dress and a pillbox hat with a whisper of netting, looking every inch the reluctant society bride fulfilling an obligation. He wore the same work shirt, but clean, paired with dark trousers that were clearly new and slightly ill-fitting. He hadn't shaved closely, leaving a shadow of gold stubble along his jaw that caught the harsh light. His size seemed to shrink the small room, yet his stillness remained, a counterpoint to the brisk efficiency of the clerk. The ceremony was a blur of mumbled words. Sarah repeated her vows, her voice cool and detached, focusing on a chip in the plaster on the far wall. Callum's responses were equally flat, but his gaze, when she dared flick her eyes towards him, was fixed on her profile with unnerving intensity. The moment the clerk pronounced them spouses, Sarah took a deliberate step away. Her skin felt too tight. "Congratulations," the clerk chirped, oblivious to the glacial atmosphere. "Would you like a photo?" "No," Sarah said simultaneously with Callum's low, "If you like." "Thank you." She turned towards the exit. Callum fell into step beside her as they emerged onto the sun-drenched steps. The city noise crashed in, a welcome assault after the sterile quiet. Sarah hailed her waiting town car, its black paint gleaming like a beetle's shell. "Well, Mrs. Thorne," Callum said, the unfamiliar title sounding rough and strangely intimate on his tongue. He squinted against the sun, looking more like the construction worker than ever. "Off to the gilded cage." Sarah paused, her hand on the car door handle. She turned, the netting of her hat casting a faint shadow over her eyes. "It's Bellweather Thorne for public purposes, Mr. Thorne, and the penthouse is merely a residence. Cages imply entrapment." She met his gaze squarely, her own icy. "I assure you, I've built my life precisely as I wish it. This arrangement changes nothing essential." A slow, lazy smile spread across his face, transforming the rugged lines. It held no warmth, only a spark of challenge. "Doesn't it? Seems to me you just handed a stranger a key." He nodded towards the car. "Better get used to the view from inside the bars, Sarah. Might grow on you." The deliberate use of her first name was a trespass. Her knuckles whitened on the handle. "The view remains mine to command, Callum," she retorted, matching his informality with icy precision. "Try not to scuff the floors." She slid into the cool, leather-scented interior, pulling the door shut with a decisive click, leaving him standing on the sunlit steps, that infuriating half-smile still playing on his lips. As the car pulled away, she saw him in the rearview mirror, hands shoved into the pockets of his new trousers, watching her departure with those unreadable grey eyes. His arrival at the penthouse later that evening was an assault on her senses. Sarah heard the soft chime of the private elevator, then the heavy, unfamiliar tread of work boots on the vast expanse of Carrara marble in the foyer. She stood in the doorway of the living room, a glass of mineral water in hand, observing the intrusion. He carried a single, worn duffel bag. He stopped just inside, his gaze sweeping the cavernous space, the floor-to-ceiling windows framing the glittering cityscape, the stark white furniture, the single expensive abstract painting that looked like a Rorschach test in chrome and black. His expression was unreadable, but his presence seemed to shrink the carefully curated emptiness, making it feel suddenly, jarringly inhabited.
The scent of him, sun, dust, clean sweat, and that underlying earthiness began to permeate the citrus-filtered air. "Guest suite is down the hall, last door on the left," Sarah stated, her voice echoing slightly in the space. "Kitchen is fully stocked. Help yourself, but clean up thoroughly. Laundry facilities are in the utility room off the kitchen. Do not enter my private wing." She gestured vaguely towards the east side of the penthouse. Callum dropped his duffel with a soft thud that seemed too loud. He turned, his grey eyes finding hers across the expanse. "Thoroughly. Got it." He took a few steps further in, his boots sounding like gunshots on the marble to Sarah's heightened nerves. He stopped near a sleek, uncomfortable-looking chaise lounge. "Place feels like a museum exhibit. Wealth. The isolation period." His tone was dry, observational, not overtly mocking, but the barb landed. Sarah's grip tightened on her glass. "It's efficient, calm, uncluttered, lifeless," he counted softly, his gaze drifting back to the city lights. "All that energy out there, and in here." He shrugged. "Guess it suits you, for now." He turned back to her, a speculative glint in his eye. "You ever just kick off those expensive shoes and walk barefoot on this ice rink?" The image was absurd, almost offensive. "Never," she clipped. "The marble is cold." It was a weak retort, and she knew it. "Noticed. Seems a shame. Marble's meant to be felt, not just looked at." He hefted his duffel. "Guess I'll go find my cell. Don't wait up." He strode down the hallway, his footsteps echoing, leaving Sarah standing alone in her perfect, suddenly alien apartment, the phantom sensation of cold marble under bare feet prickling her imagination. Days settled into an uneasy rhythm. Callum left early, before Sarah rose, presumably for his construction site. He returned late, often dusty, sometimes smelling faintly of concrete or engine oil. He was a ghost in the penthouse, mostly silent, adhering to the boundaries she'd set with frustrating precision. Yet, his presence was a constant, low-level disturbance. She began to notice things. A perfectly repaired cabinet hinge in the kitchen she hadn't realized was loose. The balcony door that used to stick now slid open effortlessly, silently. One morning, she found a single perfect espresso waiting on the counter beside her usual setup, steam curling invitingly. He was nowhere to be seen. She drank it. It was exactly how she liked it. Strong, short, no sugar. How? The question buzzed under her skin. The accidental touches were the worst. Passing in the wide hallway, his rough knuckles grazing the smooth silk of her sleeve, reaching for the same document Eleanor had left on the console table, their fingers brushing. A jolt, sharp and electric, would shoot up her arm each time, leaving her breathless and furious. At him, at her traitorous body. She'd pull back as if scalded, her composure cracking for a split second before she slammed it back into place. He never acknowledged it, just a brief, unreadable glance before moving on. One evening, the silence became oppressive. Sarah sat in the living room, bathed in the cold glow of her laptop screen, battling a recalcitrant clause in a Tokyo merger agreement. The city lights glittered, indifferent, frustration coiled tight in her chest. She felt a presence before she heard him. Callum stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame. He'd showered. His hair was damp, darkening to a deeper gold, curling slightly at the nape of his neck. He wore a simple grey t-shirt that stretched across his chest and shoulders, and faded sweatpants. The casual intimacy of it was jarring. He held two mugs, hit a wall. His voice was a low rumble in the quiet room. Sarah didn't look up, her fingers stabbing at the keyboard. "Negotiations require focus, Mr. Thorne, something best achieved in solitude." He ignored the dismissal, walking into the room. He placed one mug on the cold glass table beside her laptop. The scent was unmistakable, chamomile and lavender, her nighttime tea, perfectly steeped. He kept the other mug, something dark, probably coffee, for himself and settled onto the far end of the white sofa, stretching his long legs out. He didn't look at her, sipping his drink, gazing out at the city. The sheer audacity, the quiet invasion of her space and routine, was breathtaking. Sarah stared at the steaming mug. "I didn't ask for this." "Didn't figure you would," he replied easily, still looking out the window. His profile was sharp in the dim light, the strong line of his nose, the curve of his jaw shadowed by stubble. Wall looked pretty high from the doorway. Sometimes a different kind of fuel helps. He finally turned his head, those storm-gray eyes meeting hers. The directness was unnerving. Or is the problem that it's not a triple espresso at midnight? Her breath hitched. He had noticed, observed. "My coping mechanisms are my own concern," she said, her voice tighter than she intended. She reached for the mug, the heat seeping into her palms. A small, traitorous comfort. "Why are you here? Shouldn't you be resting for your strenuous labors tomorrow?" The sarcasm was thin. He took another slow sip of coffee, his eyes never leaving her face. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken currents. "Maybe I find the view from the cage more interesting than I expected," he said finally, his voice dropping lower, almost intimate. "Watching the warden wrestle her demons is a compelling pastime." Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, a mix of anger and something else, something perilously close to flustered embarrassment. "I am not your entertainment, Mr. Thorne." "Callum," he corrected softly. "We are married, Sarah, even transactionally." He leaned forward slightly, placing his mug on the table with a soft click. The movement brought him closer. She could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the pulse beating steadily in the strong column of his throat. The scent of him, clean soap, coffee, and that underlying, uniquely him earthiness washed over her. And you're wrestling something fierce right now. Is it the Tokyo deal? Or is it the fact that I'm sitting here, drinking coffee in your pristine museum? Her control frayed. Get out, she hissed, the words sharp and brittle, shattering the charged quiet. This is my space. You have your quarters. Stay in them. He didn't flinch. He held her furious gaze for a long, heart-stopping moment. She saw something flicker in his eyes, not anger, but a deep, unsettling understanding, and perhaps a spark of challenge met. Slowly, deliberately, he stood. He was taller than she remembered, his presence suddenly overwhelming in the dim room. He picked up his mug. "Night, Sarah," he said, his voice low, calm, but carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. "Sweet dreams. Hope the wall crumbles." He walked out, his footsteps silent on the plush rug, leaving only the faint scent of coffee, the warmth of the unwanted tea mug in her hands, and the terrifying echo of her own rapidly beating heart, pounding against the cage of her ribs like a frantic bird. The city lights outside seemed to blur. The perfectly controlled world of Seraphina Bellweather had developed its first, irrevocable crack, and its name was Callum Thorne.
Chapter 2. The sterile perfection of Seraphina Bellweather's life had fractured. Callum Thorne's presence in the penthouse wasn't just an intrusion. It was a seismic shift, a constant tremor beneath the marble floors. The revelation simmered not in words, he offered none, but in the profound change in his bearing. The pretense of the humble construction worker evaporated like morning mist. He moved through the vast space, not as an interloper, but as a conqueror, surveying territory that was, by some unfathomable twist, partly his. He left earlier than ever, not in worn work clothes, but in suits that whispered of obscene wealth, charcoal wool that draped perfectly over his powerful shoulders, crisp white shirts that contrasted starkly with the lingering tan on his neck. He returned late, smelling not of sawdust and sweat, but of expensive sandalwood cologne and the ozone tang of power. The guest suite remained his nominal quarters, but his influence seeped into every corner. A heavy leather-bound volume on Byzantine architecture appeared on the chrome coffee table. A pair of handcrafted Italian loafers, polished to a mirror shine, sat neatly by the elevator, replacing the scuffed work boots. The air hummed with his silent occupation. Sarah watched, obsessed, hyper-aware in a way that scraped her nerves raw. She found herself lingering over her morning espresso, straining to hear the soft chime of the private elevator that signaled his departure. Her gaze would snag on the way the sunlight caught the precise cut of his jaw as he scanned the financial news on a tablet, the effortless command in his posture as he took a call in the living room, his low voice rumbling instructions that sounded like edicts. The grey eyes, when they occasionally met hers across the breakfast bar he now dared to share the space in the mornings, held no deference, only a deep, unnerving assessment that felt like he was reading the turmoil beneath her icy facade. "Sleep well, Mrs. Thorne?" he'd ask, the title a deliberate barb, a reminder of the gilded cage he'd referenced on their wedding day. He'd sip his black coffee from a heavy ceramic mug that hadn't been in her cupboard before. "Perfectly, Mr. Thorne," she'd counter, emphasizing the formality, refusing to yield her name. "The silence is restorative, a lie." The silence was thick with his unspoken presence, with the echo of his low voice, the phantom scent of sandalwood. One morning, he paused beside her chair. She was reviewing a proposal, her fingers tight on her stylus. He leaned down, ostensibly to reach for the carafe of orange juice, his arm brushing her shoulder. A jolt, fierce and electric, shot through her. She froze, the stylus digging into the tablet screen. "Careful," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. "You'll crack the glass. Wouldn't want to damage your pristine tools." His gaze flickered to the white-knuckled grip on her stylus, then back to her face, a ghost of that infuriating, challenging smile playing on his lips. Or is it the proposal causing the tension? Bellweather Holdings eyeing the old Garfield warehouse district. Ambitious, risky. Sarah jerked away, the heat in her cheeks betraying her. "My business strategies are none of your concern." Her voice was clipped, brittle. "Everything in this city is my concern, Sarah," he replied smoothly, straightening, pouring the juice with infuriating calm. "Eventually you'll understand that." He took his mug and walked towards the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the cityscape he seemed to command. "Though watching you try to conquer it piece by piece, it has a certain charm, like a kitten batting at a lion." The comparison was outrageous, humiliating. I am not a kitten, she hissed, rising from her chair, and this city respects Bellweather Holdings. He turned, leaning against the glass, the sprawling metropolis framing him. The morning light gilded his hair, highlighting the sharp planes of his face, the power radiating from him. Respects, or fears the name. He took a slow sip of coffee. There's a difference. Fear is brittle. It shatters. His grey eyes held hers, steady, knowing, like control held too tightly. She fled the room. The taste of her espresso turned to ash in her mouth. His words echoed, finding the cracks he'd already opened. The need to know, to shatter the mystery of him, became an insidious itch beneath her skin, warring violently with the forbidden pull she felt whenever he was near. She found herself cataloguing him, the surprising breadth of his knowledge revealed in a discarded newspaper article he'd annotated, the way his large, capable hands handled a delicate crystal paperweight with unconscious grace, the low timbre of his rare laugh, a sound that seemed to resonate deep in her own chest. The breaking point came unexpectedly. A crucial negotiation for the Garfield warehouse district, the one he'd mentioned, was imploding. Sera's carefully cultivated consortium was crumbling. Whispers of a rival bidder, impossibly well-funded and ruthlessly efficient, had spooked her investors. Her lead negotiator, a man named Davies, whose loyalty she'd bought at considerable expense, was suddenly unreachable. Panic, cold and sharp, began to needle its way through her usual icy control. She needed Davies' signature on a final desperate counteroffer now. His apartment yielded nothing. His known haunts were empty. Her assistant Eleanor, pale and flustered, finally whispered. He mentioned meeting someone near the Garfield site itself, Miss Bellweather, earlier today. Something about last-minute assurances. The Garfield district. A graveyard of decaying brick and broken windows, far from Bellweather's gleaming towers. Why there? Suspicion, cold and heavy, settled in Sera's gut. It warred with the frantic need to salvage the deal, and beneath it, a darker, more terrifying thought. Callum. His knowing comment, his assertion that everything was his concern. Driven by fury, desperation, and a reckless need for answers, Sera dismissed her driver. She took one of the company's unmarked sedans, navigating the midday traffic with a cold, focused rage that honed her senses to a razor's edge. The sleek car felt alien amidst the potholed streets leading to the derelict Garfield warehouses. Graffiti scarred the rusting metal doors. The air smelled of damp concrete, decay, and diesel fumes. She parked a block away, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Pulling her coat tighter, she walked, her designer heels clicking incongruously on the cracked sidewalk. She spotted Davies' flashy sports car, parked near a particularly dilapidated structure, Warehouse 7. Its huge, rusted doors were slightly ajar. A sliver of light escaped. Drawing a shaky breath, Sera approached. She slipped through the gap, the heavy metal cold against her palm. The interior was cavernous, dimly lit by high, grimy windows. Dust motes danced in the weak shafts of light. The air was thick with the smell of old oil and dry rot. And then she saw it. At the far end, where the dereliction abruptly ceased, stood a wall of gleaming, bulletproof glass. Behind it, bathed in warm, modern lighting, was a sleek, minimalist lobby. Polished steel, white marble floors, a reception desk of pale wood, and standing before it, in animated conversation with two sharply dressed executives, was Callum Thorne. Not her Callum Thorne, not the construction worker, nor even the unsettlingly powerful penthouse occupant. This was a king. He wore a suit that cost more than her monthly security bill, the fabric clinging to his broad shoulders and lean waist. His posture radiated absolute authority. He gestured, and the executives nodded with deference bordering on awe. His face was animated, sharp with intelligence and command, utterly devoid of the watchful stillness she knew. The storm-gray eyes were focused, intense, calculating. Sera's world tilted. The cold panic solidified into ice in her veins. Thorne consolidated. The phantom rival. The impossible funding. It was him. He hadn't just observed. He'd orchestrated. He'd undermined her, played her. The betrayal was a physical blow, stealing her breath. Yet intertwined with the fury, a terrifying wave of awe crashed over her. The sheer magnitude of his hidden power, the audacity of the deception, it dwarfed her own empire. He wasn't just wealthy, he was the city's hidden bedrock, its shadow king. As if sensing the weight of her gaze, Callum turned, not towards the executives, but towards the reflection in the pristine glass wall. His eyes locked onto hers in the dusty gloom of the warehouse. For a heartbeat, time stopped. She saw the flicker of surprise in his steely gaze, quickly masked by an unnerving calm. Then recognition, and something else, a stark, challenging honesty. No apology, no evasion, just the raw truth of who he was, reflected back at her across the gulf of decay and deception. Sera stumbled back, the rough brick wall scraping her palm. She didn't wait.
She fled the warehouse. The image of him, powerful, commanding, utterly in control, burned onto her retinas. The drive back to the penthouse was a blur of honking horns and blurred streetlights, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, her mind a whirlwind of icy rage and terrifying unwanted fascination. The penthouse felt different upon her return, not just empty, but charged, waiting. The sterile air seemed thick with impending confrontation. Sarah shed her coat, her movements sharp, mechanical. She walked through the living room, past the abstract chrome painting, down the hallway towards the guest suite. His door was ajar. Inside, the space was neat, impersonal, but dominated now by a large locked briefcase of supple leather that hadn't been there before, symbols of his hidden life. She didn't enter. Instead, she went to the utility room off the kitchen. There, shoved into a corner, were the discarded artifacts of his deception, his worn work boots. She picked one up. It felt heavy, alien in her manicured hands, still faintly smelling of dust and honest labor, a smell now rendered utterly false. Carrying the boot like a damning piece of evidence, she walked back to the living room. She didn't have to wait long. The soft chime of the elevator announced his return. The doors slid open. Callum stepped out, shedding his expensive suit jacket, revealing the powerful lines of his shoulders beneath the pristine white shirt. He loosened his tie, the movement fluid, confident. He saw her immediately, standing in the center of the vast room, the worn work boot held loosely in her hand. His steps faltered for only a fraction of a second before he resumed walking towards her, his expression unreadable, the storm-gray eyes fixed on hers. She simply held up the boot. The accusation hung heavy and silent in the air between them. The polished marble floor reflected their tense figures, her rigid with fury and betrayal, him radiating a potent calm that felt like a dare. We stopped a few feet away, his gaze dropping to the boot, then lifting back to her face. He didn't look guilty. He looked expectant, resigned perhaps to the confrontation, but utterly unapologetic. The scent of sandalwood and power washed over her, mingling with the faint, lingering smell of the boot. Still, she said nothing. Words felt inadequate, dangerous. The silence stretched, thick with the weight of his deception and her discovery. The city lights glittered outside, indifferent to the seismic shift happening within this glass cage. Callum broke the silence, his voice low and steady, devoid of its earlier teasing barbs. "See something you needed, Sarah?" The casual use of her name, now stripped of its previous challenge, felt like a fresh violation. She dropped the boot. It hit the marble with a dull, hollow thud that echoed in the vast space. The sound seemed to shatter the last vestiges of her control. She took a step towards him, her chest heaving, the icy fury giving way to something raw and primal. "Who are you?" The words tore from her throat, ragged, stripped bare. Hui didn't flinch. He met her furious gaze head-on, his own eyes dark pools of unfathomable depth. "You saw," he stated simply. "Thorne Consolidated isn't just a competitor, Sarah. It is the ground this city is built on. Bellweather builds pretty towers on it." The confirmation, delivered with such chilling simplicity, was another blow. "You lied," she whispered, the sound harsh. "You played me. You undermined my deal. I tested. Your consortium was weak. Davies was a leak waiting to happen. I merely accelerated the inevitable." He took a step closer, closing the distance she'd tried to maintain. The heat radiating from him was intense, a physical force. "Did you really think a dying man's wish for tradition would bind me to a stranger without scrutiny, without knowing the mettle of the woman I'd be tying myself to?" The scent of him, the sheer physicality of his presence, warred violently with the torrent of betrayal crashing through her. She could see the faint pulse in his throat, the slight flare of his nostrils. His gaze dropped to her lips for a fleeting, incendiary moment before snapping back to her eyes. "You had no right," she spat, but the fire in her words was laced with a tremor she couldn't control. The fury was morphing, terrifyingly, into something else, a magnetic pull towards the sheer, undeniable force of him, the raw power he embodied now stripped of its disguise. "I had every right," he countered, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous rumble. He took another step. They were almost touching now. She could feel the warmth of his breath on her face. "Just as you have the right to your anger. But look at me, Sarah." His command was soft, impossible to ignore. "Look at what you uncovered. Is the truth more terrifying than the lie?" Her breath hitched. She was drowning in the storm-gray depths of his eyes, seeing not the construction worker, not the enigmatic roommate, but the king in his revealed domain. The betrayal was acute, agonizing, yet the forbidden desire she'd fought so hard against roared to life with terrifying intensity, fanned by the sheer magnitude of who he truly was. The controlled CEO and the Shadow King, locked in a silent battle of fury and attraction on the cold marble floor of her gilded cage. The air crackled, heavy with the weight of unsaid words and the terrifying electric promise of what might happen if one of them dared to move.
Chapter 3. The silence that followed Callum's challenge, "Is the truth more terrifying than the lie?" wasn't empty. It was a vacuum, sucking the oxygen from the vast, sterile living room, compressing the space between them until every molecule vibrated with the force of their confrontation. Sarah stood frozen, the discarded work boot a pathetic monument to shattered illusions at her feet. His proximity was a brand. The heat radiating from him in the penthouse's perpetual chill was a physical assault. Sandalwood, power, and the faint, lingering ghost of the man he'd pretended to be, sawdust and sunshine, warred in her senses. Betrayal was a cold knife twisting in her gut. He'd manipulated her, undermined her, observed her like a specimen under glass. Fury, white-hot and righteous, surged, demanding retaliation, expulsion, a scorching verbal evisceration. Yet beneath the icy rage, something else pulsed, hotter and far more terrifying, the forbidden desire, no longer a whisper but a roar, amplified 1,000-fold by the sheer undeniable magnitude of the man revealed. The construction worker was a phantom. Callum Thorne, Shadow King of New Veridia, was devastatingly real. His power wasn't just financial, it was elemental, a force of nature contained within the lean, powerful frame inches from hers. It terrified her, it magnetized her. She found her voice, a brittle shard of ice. Terrifying? No, infuriating, contemptible. She forced her chin up, meeting his storm-gray gaze, refusing to be cowed, even as her pulse hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. You played a grotesque game. For what? Amusement. To prove you could. His expression didn't change, but his eyes seemed to deepen, absorbing her fury. To see, he said, the word low and resonant, to see the steel beneath the polish. Sarah, to know if the woman bound to me by paper was worth the truth. He took the smallest step closer, closing the final distance. She could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the dark gold of his lashes, the pulse beating steadily in the strong column of his throat. His gaze dropped, lingering on the rapid flutter at the base of her own neck before returning to her eyes. The Bellweather Ice Queen, fascinating, but what happens when the ice cracks? What burns beneath? His words were a direct assault on her most guarded self. They stripped her bare more effectively than any physical act. The air crackled, the scent of him intensified, flooding her senses, dizzying. You know nothing about what burns beneath, she hissed, but the defiance was weakening, fraying at the edges. Her body betrayed her, leaning infinitesimally towards his heat. Don't I? His hand lifted, not to touch her, but to hover near her cheek, a hair's breadth away. The heat of his palm was a tangible force. I know the flush that stains your neck when you're angry. I know the way your breath catches when I stand too close. I know the fury in your eyes right now, and the hunger. His voice dropped to a rough whisper. I know the taste of your control, Sarah Bellweather, and I know how desperately you want to lose it. It was the final provocation, the dam holding back the torrent of rage, humiliation, and that terrifying, overwhelming desire shattered. Logic, caution, the carefully constructed fortress of her self-control, all crumbled. A sound escaped her, half sob, half snarl. Her hands flew up, not to push him away, but to fist in the immaculate fabric of his white dress shirt. She yanked him forward with a strength born of pure, unadulterated fury and unleashed need. The kiss wasn't tender, it was a collision, a claiming, a surrender. Her lips crashed against his, fierce and demanding, teeth scraping, tongues clashing in a battle for dominance that mirrored the war inside her. She tasted coffee, power, and the sharp, clean edge of his betrayal. It was intoxicating, infuriating, utterly consuming. He didn't resist. He met her with equal ferocity, a low growl vibrating in his chest as his arms locked around her, hauling her against the unyielding wall of his body. One large hand fisted in the sleek knot of her chignon, sending pins scattering like tiny diamonds across the cold marble floor. The other splayed across the small of her back, pressing her impossibly closer. The world dissolved into sensation, the scrape of his stubble against her jaw, her neck, the overwhelming heat of his skin burning through the thin silk of her blouse, the hard planes of his chest and abdomen against her softness, the dizzying scent of sandalwood and male enveloping her, the sound, ragged breaths mingling, the rustle of fabric, the soft, involuntary whimper that escaped her throat as his mouth trailed fire down her neck. Rational thought was incinerated. There was only this, the fury, the betrayal, the terrifying, exhilarating plunge into the abyss of wanting him. He lifted her effortlessly, her legs wrapped around his waist of their own volition, anchoring her to the storm. He carried her, not towards the bedrooms, but across the living room to her own obsidian desk, the symbol of her control, her power, her meticulously ordered life. Papers, a crystal paperweight, her sleek laptop, all were swept aside with a brutal, careless swipe of his arm, crashing to the floor in a discordant symphony.
He set her down on the cold, hard surface, the shock of the marble against her thighs cutting through the haze for a split second before his body covered hers again, his weight pinning her, grounding her in the maelstrom. His hands were everywhere, calloused palms mapping her skin with rough urgency. Her blouse gave way beneath his fingers, buttons pinging off the desk like gunshots, the silk tearing with a sound that seemed obscenely loud in the charged silence. Cool air brushed her bared skin, followed instantly by the searing heat of his mouth on her collarbone, the swell of her breast. She arched into him, fingers digging into the muscles of his shoulders, nails scraping through the fine fabric of his shirt. The contrast was intoxicating, the cold, unforgiving marble beneath her, the scorching heat of him above her, the rough texture of his hands against her smooth skin. He freed himself from his trousers with impatient haste, the movement raw, primal. His eyes, when they met hers, were dark with storm clouds, stripped bare of all pretense, burning with the same desperate hunger that consumed her. There was no gentle preamble, no whispered endearments. This was conflagration, not courtship, her claiming forged in the fires of betrayal and unleashed desire. He entered her in one deep, claiming stroke that stole her breath, a shockwave of intense sensation obliterating everything else. A cry tore from her throat, not of pain but of profound, shattering release. The walls she'd spent a lifetime building didn't just crack, they vaporized. What followed was a furious, desperate rhythm, a physical manifestation of their battle. It was less love-making, more mutual devouring. Hands gripped, pulled, demanded, mouths clashed, tasted, claimed. The cold marble bit into her back, a counterpoint to the furnace heat of his skin. The only sounds were the slap of flesh on flesh, the ragged gasps tearing from their lungs, the low groans rumbling in his chest, the slick, intimate sounds of their joining. She met his thrusts with equal ferocity, her hips rising, her legs locked around him, pulling him deeper, urging him on. The fury was still there, a dark undercurrent, but it was subsumed by a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated sensation, the exquisite friction, the overwhelming fullness, the shocking intimacy of his body moving within hers. It was surrender and conquest, violation and communion, all fused in the white-hot crucible of their collision. Her climax hit her like a detonation, wave after wave of pure, mindless ecstasy tearing through her, ringing a raw, keening cry from her throat. He followed moments later, his body rigid, a guttural groan ripped from him as he buried himself deep, his release a hot flood that seemed to seal the fracturing of their old worlds. Silence descended, thick and heavy, broken only by the ragged symphony of their breathing. Callum slumped forward, his forehead resting against hers, his body still trembling slightly. His weight was a solid, anchoring presence on the cold desk. Sarah lay beneath him, boneless, adrift. The sterile perfection of her office was a shambles. Papers littered the floor. Her torn blouse hung open. The obsidian surface beneath her felt imprinted with the heat of their bodies. The scent of sex, sweat, and sandalwood hung heavy in the air, irrevocably altering the sterile citrus atmosphere. He lifted his head slowly. His storm-gray eyes were dark, fathomless, stripped of their usual guarded intensity, holding only a raw, stunned vulnerability that mirrored her own. He traced the line of her cheekbone with a surprisingly gentle fingertip, his calloused skin rough against her smoothness. He didn't speak. Words were impossible, insufficient. The silence stretched, thick with the aftershocks of their explosion, the shared understanding of a line irrevocably crossed. Eventually he shifted, lifting himself off her. The cool air rushed in where his heat had been, making her shiver. He reached down, retrieving his discarded suit jacket, and draped it carefully over her bare shoulders. The gesture, simple and protective, sent a fresh wave of complex emotion crashing through her, gratitude, confusion, lingering resentment, and an overwhelming, terrifying tenderness. He held out a hand. She stared at it for a moment, then placed her own in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong, pulling her gently off the cold desk. Her legs felt unsteady. He steadied her, his arm slipping around her waist, pulling her against his side. He didn't lead her to the guest suite, or even to her own pristine bedroom. He led her silently to the vast white sofa in the living room, the one he'd sat on the night he brought her tea. He sat, pulling her down beside him. They sat in silence, bathed in the city's neon glow filtering through the windows, his arms still around her, her head finding an unexpected resting place against his shoulder, enveloped in the scent of his jacket and his skin. The fury hadn't vanished, the betrayal still ached, but it was tangled now with something vast and irrevocable, a profound intimacy forged in the crucible of their collision. The Ice Queen had melted, the Shadow King had been seen. Days bled into nights, marked not by schedules or meetings, but by the discovery of each other's bodies and the hesitant exploration of the emotional wreckage left behind. The penthouse transformed, the sterile museum atmosphere dissolved under the weight of their shared reality. Callum's books, dense histories, architectural treatises, volumes of poetry she wouldn't have guessed he read, appeared on shelves next to her business journals. A chunky, hand-knitted charcoal grey sweater, impossibly soft, was draped over the back of her favorite chrome chair. The scent of freshly brewed coffee replaced the sterile citrus in the mornings, often accompanied by the warm, buttery aroma of pastries he'd bring from a bakery downtown she'd never heard of. Conversations began, tentative at first, woven into the quiet moments. Not about the betrayal, not yet, but about inconsequential things that felt monumental. The way the light hit the river at dawn, a particularly aggressive pigeon on the balcony, the absurd comfort of his ridiculous sweater. Words were sparse, often replaced by touches, a hand brushing hers as they passed in the kitchen, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her bare arm as they read on the sofa, the solid warmth of his body beside hers in the vast bed they now shared. The bed in her wing, her fortress had been breached, and she found she didn't want to rebuild the walls. One rain-lashed afternoon, they were entangled on the sofa, limbs lazily intertwined. Sarah traced the faint scar on his knuckle. "Demolition accident," she murmured, her voice still husky with disuse, the first tentative probe into his hidden past. He caught her hand, bringing her knuckles to his lips. His kiss was featherlight, fist fight, over a girl. "I was 16, a faint smile touched his lips. "Lost the fight, won the girl. Briefly," she snorted softly, a surprisingly free sound. "Charming, and the empire, built on teenage brawls and stolen kisses." He shifted, rolling her beneath him, bracing himself on his elbows. Rain streaked the windows behind him, casting shifting patterns of light and shadow on his face. "Built on knowing what's worth fighting for," he said, his gaze serious, holding hers. "And what's worth waiting for?" He dipped his head, capturing her lips in a kiss that was slow, deep, and infinitely more devastating than their first collision. It spoke of possession, yes, but also of a dawning tenderness, a shared vulnerability. "Even if it meant hiding in plain sight," he murmured against her mouth. "Watching you, wanting you, wondering if you'd ever see me. Not the worker, not the tycoon, just the man who wanted the impossible." Her heart clenched. The resentment flickered, but it was muted now, overshadowed by the profound connection forged in the aftermath. "The impossible being?" she breathed, her hand sliding up his back beneath his t-shirt, feeling the powerful muscles shift. "You," he stated simply. Breaking, his lips trailed down her neck. Surrendering, his hand slid under the waistband of her soft leggings. Belonging, his touch was deliberate, incendiary, reigniting the embers that never truly died. This time, it wasn't fury that drove them, but a deepening current of intimacy and rediscovery. They moved to the bed, shedding clothes with less urgency, more reverence. He explored her body with lingering touches, learning the sensitive curve behind her knee, the spot where her neck met her shoulder, that made her gasp, the way her breath hitched when he traced the swell of her hip. She, in turn, mapped the hard planes of his chest, the ridges of his abdomen, the surprising softness of his hair as she fisted her hands in it. The silence was filled with sighs, gasps, the rustle of sheets, the slick sounds of arousal building slowly, deliberately. When he entered her this time, it was with aching slowness, a deep claiming stroke that filled her completely, a reunion of fractured pieces. They moved together, a slow sinuous rhythm born of newfound knowledge and burgeoning trust. His eyes held hers, storm grey and fathomless, reflecting the city lights and the intensity of their connection. The climax, when it came, wasn't a detonation, but a powerful rolling wave that built and crested, leaving them breathless and clinging, sweat-slicked skin pressed together, hearts pounding a frantic duet. Afterwards, he held her close, her head tucked under his chin, his fingers stroking her back in slow, soothing circles. The rain drummed steadily against the windows, a lullaby for their fragile, forged peace. They began to merge their empires, not through hostile takeovers, but through shared vision. One evening, sprawled on the rug before the fireplace, a feature Sarah had never used, now crackling with real flame, blueprints were spread out, not for another sterile tower, but for the Garfield warehouse district. "Community center here," Callum pointed, his finger tapping a decaying structure on the plan. His other hand rested possessively on Sarah's bare foot, absently massaging her arch. "Mixed-use development, affordable housing, artisan spaces, green areas, not just profit, purpose." Sarah leaned over the plans, her hair falling forward. She pointed to another section. "Bellweather can handle the residential, Thorne infrastructure. We co-fund the community hub." She looked up, meeting his gaze. The shared purpose felt exhilarating, a different kind of power, a joint legacy, less kitten, more co-conspirator. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face, lighting his eyes. He captured her foot, pulling her gently towards him across the blueprints. "Co-conspirator," he agreed, his voice a low rumble. "Partner." He leaned down, brushing his lips against hers. "Mrs. Thorne." She pushed against his chest, a playful resistance. Bellweather Thorne, she corrected, but there was no ice in it now, only warmth. It has a certain ring. Power couple, wouldn't you say? He chuckled, the sound warm and rich, vibrating against her skin. I'd say, he murmured, his hand sliding up her calf, that the view from inside the cage is infinitely preferable with the right cellmate. He kissed her again, deeply, a promise sealed not just in boardrooms, but in the quiet warmth of their shared fire. The sterile penthouse was gone. In its place was a home, filled with the scent of coffee, old books, wood smoke, and the profound, all-consuming bond forged in the fires of forbidden desire and hard-won truth. The ice had melted, the shadows had lifted. Together, they were building something new.
Chapter 4. The city of New Veridia glittered like spilled jewels beneath the Bellweather Thorne penthouse, a testament no longer to solitary ambition, but to a shared dominion forged in fire. The air within, once sterile and echoing, now thrummed with a different energy, the low murmur of shared purpose, the rustle of blueprints mingling on the reclaimed obsidian desk, the faint comforting scent of coffee and Callum's sandalwood cologne, layered over the lingering aroma of Sarah's jasmine perfume. His heavy hand-knitted sweater was a familiar puddle of charcoal wool on the back of her chrome chair, a flag of quiet conquest. Sarah stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, not observing the city like a distant queen, but surveying it as part architect, part owner. Callum approached from behind, his steps silent on the plush rug they'd chosen together, a deep burgundy that warmed the space. He slipped his arms around her waist, drawing her back against the solid warmth of his chest. His chin rested on the crown of her head, his breath stirring the fine hairs at her temple. "Ready for the lion's den, Mrs. Thorne?" His voice was a low rumble against her ear, the title no longer a barb, but a private cherished possession. She leaned into him, a sigh escaping her lips, as ready as one can be to unveil the city's best-kept secret and explain why the Bellweather Ice Queen melted into a puddle for the broke construction worker. She turned slightly in his arms, catching the glint of amusement in his storm-grey eyes. "Though I maintain puddle is a gross exaggeration, more of a strategic thaw." His chuckle vibrated through her. "Strategic," he repeated, nuzzling her neck, sending familiar shivers down her spine. "Is that what we're calling it? Because I recall a certain CEO making rather unrestrained noises on this very desk." His hand slid lower, possessively cupping her hip. Sarah swatted his arm playfully, a flush warming her cheeks despite herself. "Details, Mr. Thorne. Unnecessary details. The public narrative is merger, mutual respect, shared vision." She traced the line of his jaw, her fingertip catching on the faint gold stubble. "Not desk-related activities." He captured her wandering finger, bringing it to his lips for a kiss. "Desk-related activities built this empire, sweetheart," he murmured, his eyes darkening with remembered heat. "Solid foundation." He released her finger, his gaze turning serious, though a smile still played on his lips. "But the vision is real. Garfield proves that. Are you sure you want the spotlight? We could stay shadows." Sarah looked out at the glittering expanse, their city. The shadows serve their purpose. Hiding is over. Bellweather and Thorne stand together. Let them see what we build. She turned fully, meeting his gaze. Besides, the look on Richard Vance's face when he realizes the laborer he tried to have thrown off his sight last year owns half his portfolio. Priceless. Callum's laugh was genuine, warm. "Ah, Vance, I look forward to his apoplexy. Just try not to gloat too obviously during the unveiling speech." He brushed a stray curl from her forehead, his touch lingering. "You're radiant when you gloat, but it terrifies the small-minded. The unveiling is yours," Sarah stated, adjusting the lapel of his impeccably tailored tuxedo. "You've been the ghost long enough. Time to step into the light, Mr. Thorne. Own it. My co-conspirator, my partner in strategic thaws and empire building." The Thorne Consolidated Annual Gala, held in the newly restored Grand Lyceum, a joint Bellweather Thorne project, was a sea of silk diamonds and carefully curated power. The air hummed with expectation and expensive perfume. Rumors had swirled for weeks about Thorne's elusive CEO finally revealing himself and the nature of his sudden deep entanglement with Seraphina Bellweather. Sarah felt the weight of hundreds of eyes as they entered, Callum's hand resting possessively on the small of her back. She wore midnight blue velvet, the dress clinging to her curves, a diamond choker glittering at her throat, elegance and power personified. Beside her, Callum was a force of nature in black tie. The raw power he'd always carried was now framed by wealth and refinement, making him utterly magnetic. The whispers crescendoed as they moved through the crowd, a palpable wave of shock and fascination. "Seraphina, daring choice of escort, simpered Eleanor Vance, Richard's wife, her eyes wide with malicious curiosity. One hardly expects to see the help elevated to, well, whatever this is. She gestured vaguely at Callum. Sarah felt Callum's hand tighten infinitesimally on her back, but his smile remained easy, dangerous. "Mrs. Vance," he greeted, his voice smooth as aged whiskey, cutting through the woman's simper. "Callum Thorne, though I believe your husband is more familiar with my work boots than my tuxedo." He extended a hand, his gaze steady, challenging. How is that waterfront development treating him? Heard there were foundational issues. Eleanor Vance blinked, flustered. Richard Vance materialized, his face mottled red. "Thorne," he spluttered, recognition dawning with dawning horror. "The bidder? He couldn't bring himself to say owner. "The CEO," Callum supplied helpfully, his smile widening, showing just a hint of teeth. He slipped his arm around Sarah's waist, pulling her closer. "And Seraphina's husband. Seems the help had a few assets tucked away." He leaned down, his lips brushing Sarah's temple in a gesture both intimate and defiant. "Shall we circulate, my love? I believe there are several people here whose jaws need collecting from the floor." As they moved away, Sarah tilted her head up, whispering, "Subtle, darling, very subtle." He grinned, unrepentant. "Where's the fun in that? Besides," his hand slid lower, dangerously close to the curve of her backside beneath the velvet. "Watching you suppress a smirk is my new favorite pastime, almost as entertaining as watching you lose control." She pinched his side, hidden by his jacket. "Behave, or I'll remind everyone how you looked covered in plaster dust." "Promises, promises," he murmured, his breath hot against her ear, sending a fresh wave of heat through her. His hand tightened on her hip. "Later. Right now, I believe I have a city to claim." The unveiling was masterful. Callum Thorne, stepping onto the stage, wasn't the construction worker or the enigmatic penthouse dweller. He was the king, revealed. He spoke with quiet authority about Thorne Consolidated's hidden reach, the vision behind the Garfield revitalization, and the powerful new alliance with Bellweather Holdings. He spoke of community, sustainable growth, and a future built on partnership. And when he said, "None of this vision would be possible without the brilliance, the strength, and the unwavering partnership of my wife, Seraphina Bellweather Thorne," the applause was thunderous. He extended his hand towards her. Sarah walked onto the stage, the flash of cameras blinding, the roar of the crowd a physical wave. She took his hand, his grip warm and sure. As she stood beside him, looking out at the sea of stunned, admiring and envious faces, she felt not exposed, but exalted. His arm slid around her shoulders, a solid anchor. The shared look they exchanged wasn't for the cameras. It was a silent conversation, profound and intimate, passing between them in the glare of the spotlight. "We did this, together." Later, in the hushed sanctuary of their penthouse, the city lights painting patterns on the ceiling, they lay entwined in the rumpled sheets of their bed. The adrenaline of the night still hummed beneath Sarah's skin. Callum traced idle patterns on her bare shoulder, his touch a familiar comfort and a lingering spark. "So," he murmured, his voice sleep-roughened, "the Shadow King is outed. The Ice Queen is officially thawed. What now, Mrs. Thorne? World domination." Sarah shifted, turning to face him, propping herself up on an elbow. Moonlight silvered his hair, softened the hard lines of his face. "Garfield first," she said, tracing the strong line of his collarbone. "Then maybe that waterfront development Vance is botching." He looked like he was about to spontaneously combust tonight. Callum chuckled, the sound warm in the darkness, cruel, beautiful, and brilliant. "My perfect partner." He caught her hand, kissing her palm, but seriously, "What about him?" He didn't need to say the name. Her father, the architect of their beginning, built on a dying man's wish and a profound deception. The lightness faded. Sarah looked towards the window, at the city her father had helped shape. "He wanted this," she said quietly. "The union, the securing of the legacy. He just didn't anticipate the method, or the man, or the fact that I needed to know the woman I was binding myself to," Callum added, his voice low and serious. "I couldn't reveal myself to a stranger, Sarah, not even for him. I had to see you, the real you, the fighter, the woman beneath the armor." He rolled onto his side, facing her fully, his gray eyes searching hers in the dim light. The deception, it wasn't malice, it was necessity, and fear that the woman who built walls that high might never let anyone in, least of all a man who'd hidden his own truth. The old hurt flickered, the sense of betrayal, but it was tempered now, overlaid with the months of shared intimacy, the profound understanding, the bone-deep trust forged in vulnerability and fire. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the lingering shadow of his own vulnerability, the fear of rejection that had driven the charade. "He would have approved of you," Sarah said softly, surprising herself with the truth of it. The power, the cunning, the absolute refusal to be anything less than what you are. She managed a small smile. He'd have hated being fooled, though. Callum's lips quirked. He'd have gotten over it, especially when he saw the empire we're building. He brushed a thumb across her cheekbone. We should go see him, tell him, show him. A week later, they stood side by side before the simple granite headstone in the serene, sun-dappled Bellweather family plot. Seraphina Bellweather, beloved father, visionary, the scent of freshly cut grass and damp earth filled the air. Birdsong provided a gentle counterpoint to the silence. Seraphina laid a single white rose on the grave. Callum stood slightly behind her, his hand resting warmly on the small of her back, a silent support. "Hello, father," Seraphina began, her voice clear but softer than usual. "I brought someone to meet you, officially." She glanced at Callum. "This is Callum Thorne, my husband, the broke construction worker you insisted I marry." A faint wry smile touched her lips. "Turns out, he owns most of New Veridia, including, effectively, Bellweather Holdings now." Callum stepped forward slightly, his hand slipping down to clasp hers. He squeezed her fingers. "Sir," he said, his voice respectful, resonant in the quiet glade. "Your daughter, she's formidable, more than I ever anticipated. The union you wanted, it's real, stronger than either of us imagined." He paused, looking down at their joined hands, then back at the headstone. "The way I went about it, it wasn't honorable. I know that. I needed to see her fire, her strength, her heart. I needed to know she was worth the truth, worth everything, and she is, more than." He lifted their joined hands slightly. "We're building something together, something lasting, something that honors the past but looks to the future. I hope that counts for something." The old hurt, the sense of manipulation orchestrated by both the man beside her and the man beneath the stone, didn't vanish, but it was enveloped by a profound sense of peace, of rightness. Her father's wish, however misguided its execution, had led her to this, to Callum, to a power and a partnership she could never have conceived of alone. Forgiveness wasn't a single act. It was the quiet understanding settling in her bones, reflected in the steady warmth of Callum's hand in hers. They stood in silence for a long moment, the unspoken words hanging in the air, acknowledgement, acceptance, the closing of a circle. The rhythm of their merged life settled into a deep, powerful current. Mornings often found them sharing the obsidian desk. Their desk now, Sarah reviewing Bellweather Holdings reports, Callum deep in Thorne consolidated blueprints, their legs tangled companionably beneath it. A shared carafe of strong coffee steamed between them. The silence was comfortable, productive, punctuated by the soft scratch of pens or the tap of keys. Vance folded, Sarah announced one such morning, a note of triumph in her voice. She slid a document across the desk. "Signed over the waterfront development rights this morning. Seems the prospect of competing directly with the combined Bellweather-Thorne juggernaut was unappealing." Callum looked up from a complex structural schematic, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. He snagged the document, scanning it quickly. "Excellent. His foundation issues just became our opportunity." He tossed the paper down and leaned back, stretching his arms behind his head, the movement pulling his t-shirt taut across his chest. "Told you watching you gloat was worth it, though I maintain my method of unsettling him at the gala was equally effective." Sarah arched an eyebrow, feigning hauteur. "Your method involved subtlety, akin to a wrecking ball, Mr. Thorne. Mine involved lawyers and leverage, far more civilized. Civilized is overrated," he countered, his gaze dropping pointedly to her lips. "Sometimes you need a wrecking ball to get to the good stuff." He pushed his chair back, standing up. He rounded the desk with that silent, purposeful stride that still made her pulse hitch. He stopped beside her chair, bracing his hands on the arms, caging her in. "Remind me," he murmured, leaning down, his breath warm on her cheek. "What was it we found the last time we cleared this desk?" Heat bloomed low in Sarah's belly. She met his stormy gaze, a challenge sparking in her own. "Irreparable damage to several expensive items," she suggested, her voice husky. "Foundational realignment," he corrected, his lips brushing hers, a whisper of a touch. "Best decision I ever made." His kiss deepened, slow and possessive, a familiar claiming that still carried the power to melt her bones. When he pulled back, his eyes were dark with promise. "Meeting with the Garfield Community Board in an hour. Try not to distract me too much before then, Mrs. Thorne. Only if you promise not to look at me like that during the meeting. The grandmothers on the board are perceptive." "Like what?" he asked innocently, already heading towards the door, throwing a devastating grin over his shoulder. "Like I'm imagining how easily that very serious pencil skirt would slide off." Sarah threw a crumpled piece of paper at him. It missed, fluttering to the floor. He just laughed, the sound echoing warmly through their shared space. The final scene wasn't a grand declaration, but a moment of pure distilled intimacy. Dawn painted the sky in streaks of rose and gold over the New Veridia skyline.
Sarah stirred, waking not to an alarm, but to the sensation of being watched. She opened her eyes. Callum lay beside her, propped up on one elbow, the sheets pooled around his waist. The first rays of sunlight caught the strands of silver beginning to thread through his gold hair, gilded the strong planes of his face, the faint stubble along his jaw. But it was his eyes that held her captive. Storm grey, yes, but now filled with a profound, quiet warmth, an unguarded tenderness that took her breath away. He wasn't just looking at her, he was seeing her, the fierce CEO, the vulnerable woman, the passionate lover, the partner in their shared dream, all of her. She didn't speak, she simply met his gaze, letting him see the reflection of his own love in her eyes, the trust, the peace, the enduring spark of desire, the profound gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. The fury, the betrayal, the icy walls were distant memories, replaced by this deep, unbreakable bond. He smiled, a slow, beautiful curve of his lips that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He leaned down, his kiss achingly tender, a silent vow whispered against her lips. It held the echo of their tumultuous beginning, the fire of their collision, and the deep, abiding peace of their hard-won union. When he pulled back, they remained close, foreheads touching, breathing the same air. Outside, the city was waking, their city. Below, the penthouse was filled with the comfortable clutter of their shared life, his books, her discarded shawl, the blueprints for the community center. Inside their bed, cocooned in warmth and the scent of each other, there was only this profound, wordless understanding. The gilded cage had become a fortress of their own making, built on trust, forged in desire, and filled with a love as powerful and enduring as the city they reshaped together. His hand found hers beneath the sheets, fingers intertwining. The unbreakable gaze held. The silence spoke volumes. They were home,